In October 2001, the quiet suburb of Conroe, Texas, became the center of one of the most shocking triple murders in the state's history. Michael James Perry, a troubled 19-year-old drifter battling addiction and run-ins with the law, crossed paths with the Stotler family, people who had once tried to help him. Sandra Stotler, a 50-year-old nurse and devoted mother, had no way of knowing that opening her door that evening would seal her fate. What happened next would horrify the community. According to investigators, Perry and his friend Jason Burkett ambushed Sandra inside her home, shooting her and dumping her body in a nearby lake. But the violence didn't stop there. They then lured Sandra's teenage son, Adam, and his friend, 18-year-old Jeremy Richardson, into the woods, where both boys were executed in cold blood. The murders were brutal, senseless, and committed for one reason: to steal Sandra's red Chevrolet Camaro. The killings shook Texas to its core. And when Perry was arrested after a high-speed chase and a shootout with police, he confessed in detail. But later, he changed his story, claiming coercion, claiming innocence, claiming he had been framed. Even on death row, he insisted he didn't kill anyone. One thing that made this case even more controversial was filmmaker Werner Herzog, who interviewed Perry shortly before his execution. Herzog was struck by Perry's emotional breakdowns, his desperate claims of innocence, and the haunting question of whether a troubled young man truly understood the gravity of what he had done or claimed he hadn't done. But while Perry wept in the interview chair, the families of Sandra, Adam, and Jeremy were still grieving and still waiting for justice. It would take almost 9 years, countless appeals, and one final walk to the death chamber before Perry's story finally ended. His last meal was simple: 3 bacon cheeseburgers, fries, chocolate cake, and Dr. Pepper. And when asked for his final words, he delivered a tearful, trembling farewell. "I want everyone to know that I am sorry for the pain I caused. Mom, I love you. I'm coming home, Dad. I'm coming home." Then, with a final gasp, Michael James Perry was pronounced dead at 6:17 p.m. To understand how a young man's violent choices destroyed 3 innocent lives, how a community struggled to make sense of the tragedy, and how a convicted killer marched toward his final moment still declaring his innocence, we have to go back to the beginning. But first, hit subscribe and tap the notification bell, because this is a case that doesn't just haunt a family, it haunts a state. Michael James Perry was born on April 9th, 1982, in Texas, but his early life was marked by instability long before he ever entered the criminal justice system. Adopted at a young age, Perry struggled to form steady attachments, drifting between households as his behavioral problems intensified. By his teens, he had been diagnosed with multiple behavioral disorders, conditions that went untreated for years as he bounced in and out of schools, foster placements, and juvenile programs. He ran away from home frequently, sometimes disappearing for days, sometimes weeks, slipping deeper into a world that cared little about structure or safety. By the age of 16, Perry had begun abusing drugs: methamphetamine, LSD, cocaine, anything that dulled reality for a few hours. His petty crimes escalated quickly: break-ins, stolen cars, drug possession, assaults. Each arrest pushed him further into the system, and each release sent him spiraling back to the streets. He cycled through rehabilitation centers and juvenile facilities, but nothing ever seemed to stick. By 19, Michael Perry wasn't just a troubled teen. He was a young man drifting without direction, tangled in addiction, homelessness, and crime, desperately trying to navigate a life already collapsing around him. No one could have predicted that within months, his name would be tied to one of the most shocking crimes in Texas history. Warm family photos of Sandra Stotler smiling at work, church events, and family gatherings. Adam Stotler in his high school uniform and playing sports. Jeremy Richardson in casual clothes, working on cars, and hanging out with friends. Slow pans across their rooms, school yearbooks, and neighborhood streets with soft, somber lighting. The Stotler family was the kind of family that made a quiet Texas town feel like home. At the heart of it was Sandra Stotler, a 50-year-old nurse whose compassion extended far beyond her patients. Known in the community as a church volunteer, a mentor, and by her friends as the mom everyone loved, whose laughter and warmth could fill a room, and whose home was always open to children, teens, and anyone in need. Her son, Adam Stotler, just 16, was the embodiment of quiet determination and promise. A high school athlete with a gentle spirit, respectful of his teachers, protective of his younger siblings, and devoted to his family, yet unaware that the trust he and his mother extended to friends and neighbors would place him in mortal danger. Alongside him was Jeremy Richardson, 18, Adam's best friend and confidant, an aspiring mechanic who dreamed of building a future from hard work and skill, a young man full of energy, laughter, and plans that would never come to fruition. This was a family defined by kindness, by trust, by opening their doors to others, including, tragically, to a young man named Jason Burkett, and by extension, Michael Perry, a decision made out of ordinary generosity that would unknowingly draw a deadly shadow into their lives, changing their world forever and leaving a community shattered by grief, horror, and disbelief. According to investigators, court records, and the chilling confession Michael Perry gave to authorities, the events of October 24, 2001, unfolded with a calculated and horrifying precision. Perry and his accomplice, Jason Burkett, returned to the Stotler home late that evening, armed and with a clear intent to commit violence. When Sandra Stotler opened the door to the familiar faces of her son's friend and an unknown companion, Perry concealed himself in the laundry room, shotgun in hand, waiting for the moment to strike. In the span of moments, he fired, killing Sandra in cold blood, and then he and Burkett transported her body to the nearby Crater Lake, leaving her lifeless form in the water, a symbol of the senseless brutality that had invaded a peaceful home. The horror escalated when they lured Adam Stotler and his friend Jeremy Richardson into the woods under false pretenses. There, in the shadows of the trees, both teenagers were executed, shot at close range in a methodical and merciless act of violence. The motive, investigators concluded, was petty theft. Sandra's bright red Chevrolet Camaro became the object of their crime, and Perry would later brag about taking it, as though the theft somehow justified the murder of 3 innocent people. Following the killings, the pair fled the scene in stolen vehicles, leading police on a high-speed chase that ended in a shootout, ultimately resulting in their arrests. The evidence collected, the blood at the Stotler home, the shell casings in the woods, witness testimony, and Perry's own admissions, painted a damning picture, one that would haunt a community and set in motion a series of events that would lead Perry from a life of petty crime to the ultimate punishment on death row. Courtroom sketches, slow pans of trial exhibits, police interrogation footage, blurred faces, close-ups of forensic evidence like shell casings, blood patterns, tire tracks, family members in the courtroom, gavel hitting. The investigation into the Stotler murders was meticulous, exhaustive, and ultimately damning, built on a combination of police interrogation transcripts, detailed forensic analysis, and witness testimony that together painted an unambiguous picture of guilt. Michael Perry gave a videotaped confession in which he described, in chilling detail, his actions inside the Stotler home and in the wooded area where Adam Stotler and Jeremy Richardson were executed. Forensic evidence later corroborated many of his statements, from blood traces found at the crime scene to shell casings and tire tracks that matched the getaway vehicles. Witnesses also came forward, recounting how Perry had boasted about the killings to friends and acquaintances, seemingly proud of the violence he had committed. Yet, during the trial, Perry's defense team argued that his confession had been coerced, claiming he had been high on methamphetamine and LSD at the time, and that police pressure had forced him into giving statements that did not fully reflect reality. Prosecutors countered with hard, independent evidence, demonstrating that every detail Perry described aligned with the crime scene, the forensic results, and the sequence of events established by investigators. The jury, after days of testimony and deliberation, found Perry guilty of capital murder for the death of Sandra Stotler and sentenced him to death, while his accomplice, Jason Burkett, received a life sentence due to a split verdict among jurors, a legal distinction that underscored the complex and harrowing nature of the case. The verdict sent shockwaves through the community, offering some measure of justice for the victims, while also setting the stage for a long, contentious appeals process that would follow in the years to come. Even after the jury's verdict and the imposition of a death sentence, Michael Perry steadfastly maintained his innocence, claiming that the confession he had given was coerced and that he had been mistreated during police interrogations, alleging that officers had roughed him up to force a statement he would later come to regret. As his legal team mounted appeals, they questioned whether the time of death for the Stotler victims had been properly established and argued that critical procedural errors may have compromised the fairness of the trial, a claim the state vehemently rejected, insisting that the evidence, physical, testimonial, and forensic, unequivocally confirmed Perry's guilt. His case eventually drew the attention of filmmaker Werner Herzog, who traveled to Texas to document Perry's story for the 2011 documentary Into the Abyss, conducting a series of intimate interviews in which Perry spoke candidly about his life, his crimes, and his remorse, or lack thereof, while Herzog, sitting silently, remarked, "I do not believe in capital punishment, but that has nothing to do with your case," highlighting the tension between justice, morality, and the law. Despite numerous appeals, motions, and requests for retrial, every court, up to and including the United States Supreme Court, denied relief, leaving Perry's death sentence firmly in place and setting the stage for the final, irreversible chapter of his life on death row, a chapter that would culminate in his last meal, his final words, and the ultimate act of state-sanctioned execution. On the morning of July 1st, 2010, Michael James Perry walked the final path that would end his life, stepping into the stark, cold confines of the Huntsville unit where decades of Texas death row executions had taken place before him. His last meal, ordered through the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, was simple yet telling of a fleeting human comfort. 3 bacon cheeseburgers, golden fries, a slice of chocolate cake, and a Dr. Pepper. Items meant to offer one final moment of normalcy before the irrevocable act. As witnesses observed from the gallery, Perry appeared visibly emotional, trembling, his body tense with the weight of the consequences he was about to face, yet composed enough to speak. In a voice quivering with sorrow and finality, he delivered his last words. "I want everyone to know that I am sorry for the pain I caused. Mom, I love you. I'm coming home, Dad. I'm coming home." The words hung in the sterile chamber, echoing through the room as Perry reportedly cried and gasped several times, a fragile mixture of fear, grief, and acceptance, before the lethal injection took its course, and he was pronounced dead at exactly 6:17 p.m., closing the final chapter of a life marked by tragedy, violence, and unanswered questions about guilt, justice, and redemption. Photos of Sandra Stotler smiling at church and home, Adam Stotler in his sports uniform, Jeremy Richardson laughing with friends, slow dissolve between images, fade to black with subtle, somber background music, overlay of candlelight flickering, final fade to the Crime Report Network logo. 3 innocent lives: Sandra Stotler, devoted mother and nurse; Adam Stotler, a promising 16-year-old high school athlete; and Jeremy Richardson, an 18-year-old with dreams of becoming a mechanic, were brutally and senselessly taken on that fateful October night in 2001, leaving a community and a family forever scarred by grief, loss, and unanswered questions. Their memory remains at the heart of this tragedy, a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the devastating consequences of violence, while Michael Perry's repeated claims of innocence, even in his final moments, cast a lingering shadow over the case, prompting debates about justice, morality, and the weight of capital punishment that continue to echo years later. For the families of Sandra, Adam, and Jeremy, however, the pain never truly ended. It lives on in every anniversary, every story told, and every conversation about the tragedy that robbed them of loved ones. If you believe that stories like these, stories that shed light on the darkest corners of human behavior, the consequences of choices, and the relentless pursuit of justice, should continue to be told, then like this video, share it with others, and comment your thoughts below, because your engagement helps keep their memories alive and the discussion about crime and justice ongoing. And don't forget to subscribe to Crime Report Network to stay informed on real, true crime investigations that matter, the stories that haunt communities, and the truths that demand to be remembered.